look how terribly they performed.
Yeah.
But I mean, the national lens went on them when these fires came, which was January. Here we are in May. It's been 5 months. I'm told there's 4 permits. 4.
Yeah.
4 permits been issued to build houses. 4.
Hello, folks, and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk. Today, we have a very special guest, Ethan Penner, who is credited with being the father of CMBS, commercial mortgage-backed securities. He created that product. He's been called a hero and living legend in commercial real estate. He's written a book recently called Greatness is a Choice, and now he wants to be governor of the great state of California. Ethan Penner, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Amir.
You're credited with creating the CMBS. You were considered a legend, especially in the 90s when you created that product. This was an instrument that immediately made you one of the most popular people in New York and to commercial borrowers across the country. It made you a good fortune as well. When you saw the Great Recession happen, and you saw that an instrument that you had created was responsible for the Great Recession, how did that make you feel?
Yeah, I would say that's a misinterpretation of what caused the Great Recession and the financial crisis of '08. I think when people blame other people, that's maybe the negative side of human beings not taking responsibility for their own behaviors. I think that securitization in general, we could talk a lot about securitization in general.
I definitely don't want to talk technicalities with you.
Yeah, no, I won't talk. I'm not going to talk technicalities, but I would say
CMBSs were known to cause the Great Recession.
Well, it was not. CMBS is just the packaging for the underlying, right? So the underlying are the loans themselves.
Right.
So the business of making loans sometimes gets overheated because there's too much competition, and lenders are inclined to make mistakes, right? Making loans they should not have made. Either they loan too much money, or they don't charge enough rate, or they are not as strict with their covenants, and as a result, they can enforce the liens of that, when things don't go right. And I think that we see history cycles, right? Sometimes there's too much money, and that vintage is bad. And when there's too little money, then that vintage of loans or investments is good. The packaging, the securitization didn't cause any problems, not for commercial real estate loans or subprime loans. It was the underlying loans themselves, which were bad.
So, in the 1990s, when you did create that product, the atmosphere for lending was non-existent. I mean, people talk about lending being slow right now.
Yes.
People talk about 2008, the lending situation being bad. But in 1991, 92, it was
dead.
Nothing.
It was dead. Right. Like if you had a loan coming due, which everyone does roughly, their maturities are usually every however many years, there's maturities every year, and those maturities faced maturity default because there were no lenders to refi, and the existing lenders really didn't want or have the ability to refi. So people can't imagine how dark that moment was in commercial real estate.
And people give you a lot of credit because creating the CMBS loosened up lending for a lot of commercial borrowers.
Well, it opened up a door that was never opened before to what I'll call the unregulated financial world. So the problem up until then was that the only lenders to commercial real estate were regulated lenders and insurance companies and banks.
Right.
And regulated lenders all act according to the regulatory edict. When the regulatory edict is lend, they all lend. When the regulatory edict is turn off your lending, they all turn off their lending. Right. They don't have the ability to go against their regulator. The CMBS market represents the non-regulated pool of money that is always in business, right? So in good times, maybe prices for CMBS directed lending is better. In bad times, it doesn't go away. It's just a different price. So I think introducing that pool of permanent, regular, always there capital was a great contribution long-term to the industry.
How do you use that as an advantage? Because right now you have a fund that's it's a REIT,
right,
for commercial assets.
Right. So when you live through cycles, you learn about human behavior, and the more you know about human behavior, the better you are in markets and investing and in many other forms of life. And I think you can anticipate things. So I remember very clearly having a lunch right in 2008. It was a winter day in 2008. And I was sitting with this individual and we were having lunch. He went to the bathroom and I was looking outside. It was Park Avenue. And I forgot the name of the place. It was a famous restaurant on Park Avenue. It was, I think, in Blackstone's building. And I was looking out, seeing people just walking in the winter. I was thinking, these people don't understand how frightening things are right now for them. They're walking around as though life is going to go on. But with the Fed literally printing trillions of dollars of new dollars, there may come a day when people don't want to take dollars in exchange for their work. They'd rather get a bundle of food or someone pay their rent because the dollar, who knows what it's going to be worth. We've seen hyperinflation in other parts of the world, and that's devastating for society. Is in those moments, the financial markets are often priced as though the world was going to end. I remember Citibank was trading for $1. And I remember, I don't buy stocks.
This was in 2008.
Yeah, I don't like buying stocks, but I remember around that time having dinner with a hedge fund guy. And I said, I don't know, but if I was you, I would load up the boat on Citibank stock. And it's all based on this concept of the world will never end. So when the financial markets are pricing things as though the world will end, that's a good time to be buying things.
And so Revanry, which is something that you started, the idea is to raise $1 billion to go after commercial assets.
So
tell us about that.
An old friend of mine started Revanry. Well, I guess I helped him start. He called me and he said,
when was this?
About a year ago, a little more than a year ago. He said, I really think that there's going to be a good business in making loans to acquirers of office buildings. People like you were just describing, who are just buying things so cheap, but there's no lenders for them.
Right.
And that's a good business. You can charge pretty good return and be in a lender's position and get the leverage of good operators. And I think he's onto something. And we need somebody to kind of fund us in a big enough way to kind of launch the company the right way. And so we've been looking at one-off deals while we're getting to that place. But I think our thesis is right. And I think that the time today is even better than it was when we thought of it.
You had the backing of Normor in the 90s.
Yes.
You said they made you feel like a rock star because everybody from across the country was contacting you looking for money at that point.
Well, I was a rock star. No, I was very fortunate. You know, Amir, I think that timing is critical. And when I started that whole CMBS movement and created my finance company, I had the perfect experience and the market need and opportunity was perfect. Had I come along a year or two earlier, it wouldn't have worked.
Right.
And had I come a year or two later, I wouldn't have been the person who made it happen. And it just timing was perfect. When I started CMBS, I was the only lender. Nomura backed me. I was a 31-year-old kid. And although I had great experience on the structured finance, I built from scratch Morgan Stanley's structured mortgage credit business. So I had credibility in the rating agencies with the bond buyers and had real experience. I was a very senior guy, even though I was young. So I had the ability to pull it off.
You had mentioned that you started at the absolute lowest bottom of the rung, right? You were
in my career. Yes,
you were like a trainee
at a savings and loan.
As a savings loans for mortgage
for single family lending.
Yeah,
I mean, if you had taken the totem pole of the finance industry in the world.
Yeah.
When I started after college, I had the lowest job on the totem pole. There was no lower than me. Okay, and kind of amazingly, 7 years later, I was at the top of the totem pole, and it was a remarkable run.
You famously helped launch the career of Barry Sternlicht. How did that come to be?
Well, I wouldn't say I launched Barry's career. You know, I think that people never create anybody else. Everybody else is self-made. I lent Barry a very important helping hand, as I did for many people. And I was privileged to be in a position to do. But I feel I was just as fortunate, and I know I was just as fortunate to have come across Barry, because that partnership of Barry and Starwood with Ethan and Nomura was magic. And we changed the hotel world together. I mean, he bought Westin with our financing and made us both. It made everyone that touched that, either of those businesses, really helped make our careers. And so I don't know, Barry, I feel as grateful to Barry as perhaps you might suggest Barry should feel grateful to me. And he probably feels the same way.
You want to run to be the governor of California. Why do you want to do that now?
Well, there's a number of reasons that I can give you for that. One is I'm attracted to desperate situations. And I'm just like the commercial real estate finance industry, and the commercial real estate industry was in an unbelievably desperate situation. And everyone was running away from commercial real estate because in the preceding few years, people had lost historic fortunes in it. I was attracted to that, to run in. And I think that California is in an equally desperate situation today. It suffered from incredible mismanagement. And I think that I love a good challenge and I love helping people. And I feel like this circles a lot of those needs for me.
Can you tell us about the wildfires and the rebuilding that's happening?
The wildfires, they're Southern California and Northern California. I don't know if you know this or your viewers, but in Gavin Newsom's terms, we've had three worst wildfires, and not just the one we just saw in Southern, but the three worst in the history of the state of California, going back to 2018. Yeah. So how we were not, you have one, let's say you have one, you go, oh my God, I had one, I didn't expect this to happen, right? Let's say you're that naive, you didn't expect it to happen, you weren't prepared. Don't you think after one, if you were a governor presiding over the worst wildfire in the history of California, you would convene experts and figure out what you need to do to make sure this didn't happen again. Well, no experts were convened. There was nothing done. We had number two, and nothing was done. And then we had number three. Now, when I say experts convened, what would I have done? First of all, there are other population centers in foresty areas, wooded areas, places people point to, for example, Austria. Yeah. And Austria has had fires, but it never ran out of control because how they manage, they clean up their foresty areas. So they take precautions. It's policy, it's public policy. They have zoning where they space their homes apart and their physical structures apart so that it's hard from fires with the fires in mind, right? So there's zoning, there's public policy, there's laws, and they've successfully never had anything like we've had in California because they actually pay attention. It's like our traffic. They actually care. People in government in Austria go, gee, I have a job. My job is to make sure that my citizens have a decent quality of life and don't suffer disasters. Our governor doesn't think that way. And our government doesn't think that way in this country. So we need to, it starts with just being more thoughtful and then convening people to fix problems. As far as treating the fire, like now that we've had that, well.
So you think they were ill prepared to begin with?
Well, everyone knows they were.
Now that it became a national news, I remember the fires in Napa were terrible.
Yes.
Stuff. But now that, you have entire neighborhoods that are wiped out.
Yes.
The national lens is on them. They have.
Well, look how terrible they performed.
Yeah.
But I mean, the national lens went on them when these fires came, which was January. Here we are in May. It's been 5 months. I'm told there's 4 permits. 4.
Yeah.
4 permits been issued to build houses. 4. Okay.
Is that because of the government or is it because people?
It's 100% because of the government. But here's the other thing. If you have this situation, you also have a problem with obviously homeowners insurance and fire insurance and earthquake insurance. And if you don't have adequate insurance, could you get a mortgage? And if you can't get a mortgage, then what's your house worth? Yeah. Who could buy a house without a mortgage? Not too many people. So this kind of loop around housing finance, which I happen to know something about, is problematic for California. It's a great vulnerability for Californians. And it's still, even after these fires, not being properly addressed. And I think that it's a whole loop. It's a whole loop that needs to be
What
addressed.
can you do let's say you're a governor tomorrow, what can you do with the insurance companies to get some security for people who do want to buy homes and get mortgages at a decent rate?
Well, the first thing is, if you're an insurance company, wouldn't you be more rather than less inclined to insure homes if the government told you that there's new rules in place, public policy for fire prevention? And if there's new, let's say, for example, in places that are considered fire zones, you would not get a building permit if you used more flammable rather than less flammable materials to build your home.
Right.
Just as an example, okay? So, or if you didn't space your home part a certain amount, or if you didn't clean up your, all the things that burn, right? Like they do in Austria. So I think public policy has to be communicated, has to be in place properly for insurers, any insurers, whether it be for-profit insurers or state-provided insurance, which we have, although it's not adequate. Any form of insurance can only be reactive and in place after the right public policies have been implemented. We haven't done that yet.
Okay, a cynic would say that here's another rich guy who thinks he can do better things better than the way they've been done.
Yeah.
Obviously, California is suffering. They've lost people. I mean, that's the ultimate testament of the success of a state or a city is their population. If it goes up, it's doing well. If it's losing people, it's doing poorly. Mm-hmm. So what do you say to those folks?
Well, I would say that first, I would say, how happy are you being a cynic in life? Has that brought you any great joy? Maybe you should rethink your approach to life. But I would say, talking about California specifically, because that's, I think, what you want to address. California is an interesting, and perhaps one of the most interesting stories in history. California, as most of your viewers might know, although it was recently just upgraded from 5th to 4th. Now, what most people don't know, if it were its own country, it would have the first largest GDP per capita in the world. First. Richer than Singapore, richer than Saudi, richer than Norway. First GDP per capita in the world. So on the surface, you would say California is unbelievable, right? And yet at the same time, California has certain statistics that are shocking. So how do you juxtapose the richest country in the world, California, with the fact that more than 30% of Californians are living at or near the poverty line? That's an official government measure it's measured by people living at 1.5 times the national poverty rate.
So disparities.
So we have 30%, which is the biggest by far, right, or a little over 30%, about double the national average, a little less than double the national average. And the affordability of life in California for most Californians is very bad. So we have a very broad disparity in outcomes for California. And at the same time, we have the highest tax structure. So we have the richest people, we're taxing them at the highest rate, but somehow it's not actually helping our citizens who are living kind of hand to mouth.
Let's say that you have the power of executive order tomorrow morning for California. Mm-hmm. Give us like 3 specific things that you would like to change immediately.
You can't wave magic wands.
People do it in the White House for the last 100 days.
Yeah. Well, as you can see with the trade deals, that's not working out as cleanly, perhaps, as maybe they initially had hoped it would. And so I think that there's lessons to be learned from that as well. There's a reason why dictatorships never last, mm-hmm, right? Because you need to sell. It's the process of being a politician is teaching and selling as much as it is anything else. And I think I'm well set for that. I've been a professor for 10 years at graduate business school. I feel like I've been teaching and selling my whole career. I've been creating new products and trying to persuade people of their merit. Mm-hmm. So selling and teaching and winning a coalition is, I think, the way to actually bring about sustained and meaningful change. Dictatorial change never lasts because it's forced upon people. So I don't think I would wave a magic wand and change anything, but if I could,
yeah,
I do think that the the financial stress of too large a part of our society is an unsustainable stress to live with as a society. And I would really endeavor to change that. Well, hold on. And I'm concerned that AI and robotics is only going to exacerbate that problem. I think you asking a very important follow-up question. How would you do this, right? Like, if I were to sit here and tell you that I have all the answers to solve healthcare, to solve budgetary and tax problems, to solve the problem of economic inequality, to solve traffic. I would be the craziest person you've ever met, right?
You're listing some big problems.
No. We have huge problems societally in California, perhaps maybe more than many. But my belief about what it takes to solve problems is, first, it takes a intellectual willingness to admit we have the problems and to actually focus on passionately solving the problems and saying, I won't live with that. So, for example, in California, in LA, I know because I sit in this, there's an hour and a half traffic each way to work and back for many people, too many people. And that hour and a half traffic implausibly begins around 6 or 6:30 in the morning. Yeah, wow, right? When I was a kid at 6 in the morning, literally the streets were empty. I look at that and I say, with that amount of traffic, the average person, if you move to California, you would lose 3 years of your remaining life in traffic.
How do you fix a problem like traffic?
My ideas are somewhere between stupid and perhaps naive. And the naive ones maybe need to be molded by people who have more expertise than me. But I care enough to be thinking about this is the real point. So I'm told that Elon Musk's Boring Company can build a mile of tunnel underneath the highway for $10 million a mile. This is a very cheap and inefficient way to solve the traffic problem. Very cheap. In fact, it's profitable because you would make that a toll road and you would be able to leave the existing roads as free so that you're not creating, like I think in other places where you're charging for people to use the roads, you're creating options. And the new roads, the tunnel roads that Boring Company would create would be profitable and so self-financed through revenues.
For AI taking over jobs, like what are some of the things that government can do to help there?
Well, I do think that the threat of AI taking over jobs is very real. And I think our government in America, not just in California, has been very poor at looking forward to kind of anticipate impacts of technology. And that's why, technology, since we moved into the tech era, we've seen this huge gaping gap between the haves and the have-nots. And one could have imagined that if one understood technology and how technology works, which is creating leverage through technology and eliminating a lot of friction, which is jobs, right? So you didn't have to be a genius, but we didn't have forward-thinking geniuses in government, and we didn't anticipate that. Same thing with globalization. We willy-nilly ran into globalization without thinking about the impact on our workers and our working class.
What can you do?
So you have AI coming. It's going to be a similar thing. There's definitely going to be a financial impact. I think the answer or an answer is around small business development. I think that one thing we always have to say to ourselves, robotics, and whether you like it or not, robotics and AI are going to continue to proliferate. It'll become a dominant part of our landscape, and we're going to all have to adjust. I think you have to say to yourself, what jobs can they do better than me? And what jobs can I do better than them? And I'm going to find the answer to the second question, and I'm going to play that hand. That's my strong hand, because the first one's not my strong hand. One of my chapters in my book, Greatness is a Choice, is actually entitled Be Human, which is a funny thing because we are human, but we should lean on our humanness more. And I think I think AI is going to be a kind of a weird gift in pushing us more towards exploring and finding our own humanness and leaning on those things.
What do you think about universal incomes?
Well, as long as people are doing something, I'm not fundamentally opposed to that. I think I'm fundamentally opposed to people getting checks for sitting home and eating pizza, smoking pot, and watching TV or playing video games.
Delivered to them by a robot.
Yeah, I'm fundamentally opposed. Because I think purposefulness and community are the foundations of a life well lived. And I think that those are, as long as universal income doesn't promote something that's antithetical with those beliefs, we have the largest homeless population in the country by far. That's in a country as wealthy as California. How is that even possible? How does that allow it to reoccur? So I do think in wealthy countries, we should have human dignity be afforded to, and a basic human quality of life be afforded to everybody.
So, I get a sense that there wasn't this one thing that triggered you to want to become a politician. Like, there's not this one thing that you're constantly advocating for.
No.
You thought that California as a whole was failing as a state.
Well, it is failing because, as you said earlier, you measure in the end, the scorecard is who's leaving and who's coming.
Right.
Do you know that in the last 5 years, I read where we were the 50th of 50 states of inbound migration for 5 straight years, which means, and I'm sorry, probably some of your readership I might insult by this, but people are choosing to move to North Dakota and Mississippi ahead of California, okay? And look, I've been to both of those places and they're fine, but they're not California, okay? So that tells you something. And the net kind of migration out of California over the last 4 or 5 years has been really frightening because it's sucking away our tax base. So what's happening is our political leaders are driving out producers, which are the people who pay taxes, who create employment. They're leaving for Texas, they're leaving for Florida, and with them are their incomes and their tax bases. So that's why California, we're in this, what I'll call beginning of a death spiral, where there's less and less people paying taxes, but our expenses as a state is still just as high. And so when that calculus gets to a certain number, you have no one to take from to support you, and you go bankrupt basically. We have to reverse that trend, and we don't have a lot of time. So when you ask me why am I running, I actually don't think California could survive 4 more years of the kind of leadership it's suffered for the last 20 or 25 years. And I think that because we're going to go to the point of no return on that tax basis and driving out the producers. Ayn Rand wrote about that in both of her books, which I read when I was in my teens, and left me with some pretty good ideas. And one of them is you can't have a society that drives out its producers. That won't work.
There's, campaigning takes a toll on you, especially this is your first time doing it. You're not I
have a lot of energy. I haven't wasted it on failed campaigns.
You shared an interesting story where you met with a group of people who knew you as a killer, in the 90s.
Yes.
90s finance in New York, you had to kill or you'd be killed.
Well, they knew me as a very passionate, aggressive businessman who brought it very hard.
And do you feel like, now that you didn't have a family then, you were very ambitious, you really wanted to, create a career for yourself. Do you feel like you have that vigor right now?
Well, I actually did have a wife and 1 child.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I did. It turns out that I didn't realize I wasn't a particularly good husband at the time because I was so imbalanced in my pursuit of, my career success. And I think that life's full of trade-offs. And I think I made that trade-off back when I was in my 30s. Whether it was the right or wrong choice, I don't know. I was, as you suggest, single-minded. And I think that's what allowed me to have the success I have. And the question you're asking me, do I have the ability to find that at the age of 64, having not had that single-mindedness for the last 20 or 25 years? The answer is 100%. It's 100%. I mean, I have it right now.
Well, Ethan, thank you so much for being here today. I hope the next time I see you, it's in the governor's office. Folks, thank you for tuning in, and tune in again for another episode of Coffee Talk.